all of you out there listening. Oh, now we're live. All right, now we're live. Welcome everyone to Playing in Tactic, a monthly live stream where we talk about offensive security things. I'm Jorge Orchilles, and today we have Matt with us and the co-host, Justin.
Justin Elze. Yep.
How are
Howdy,
you doing?
everyone.
Matt, welcome. I met Matt, I don't even know when, through Sands. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Matt?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a fellow SAND instructor along with George. I normally stick with the red side. I'm the author of a vulnerability assessment course. I teach them the pen test stuff. I work with a company called Open Security. We do all kinds of security work, red teaming, down to incident response, all of that jazz. And sometimes I YouTube, which is fun too. So howdy to meet you all.
You definitely have the right microphone for that. The listeners appreciate it.
I copied off everyone else. Yes, good me.
Awesome. Well, for anyone listening in for the first time, this is Playing in Tactic. We do little monthly live streams. We're going to be doing them every third Thursday of the month at 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll be mostly talking about offensive things in the InfoSec space and bringing on guests. So make sure to smash that subscribe button. And today with Matt, we're going to talk a little bit about what happened all last year, especially in the offensive space. And Justin really wants to talk about QR codes because apparently Twitter's talking about it. And yeah, we're going to do some of that. So to get started, Matt, I saw you put out a video on a year in review. Very well made, by the way.
Thank you.
What do you have for us? What are some cool things you saw last year?
Well, the video is entitled 2021, the worst year in the history of InfoSec, which is a bit hyperbolic, I think. But at the same time, gee whiz, was last year a ransomware year and a half, right? We had, what was it? Aces for 50 million from REvil early on in the year. Was that March? And they actually paid that one. So I think that's to date the biggest ransomware payout that we actually have on the books, and then, or at least publicly acknowledged. I should say that. And then you've got Kaseya, same group, but they get hacked and ransomware for 70 million. I don't believe they paid that though. So still, geez. I remember the old days.
Ransomware.
Yeah, ransomware. For sure.
So lots of ransomware. That hasn't changed, huh?
Yeah, I think the other trend we saw last year is patching, because the biggest vulnerabilities we got last year probably Print Nightmare and Log4j, and every single time vendor first patch doesn't do crap. Second vendor patch, maybe a little bit, but you got to do a lot more too. Third vendor patch, now we're cooking. Hopefully we're going somewhere, but who knows? Who knows?
Printing didn't go well. It went patch okay. Maybe we should never print again and save the trees is basically the route everybody decided to go.
My recommendation for everyone was to create a scheduled task that kills the print spooler on boot. Who needs it?
Hey,
at least on the domain controllers.
Any Windows server. Who's printing on a Windows server? It's like having Internet Explorer on a Windows server. It's like there's one reason you have that, and that's so that you can Google for Google Chrome and download it. That's it.
We talked about the ransomware playbooks and stuff last year, and it was depressing on some points to see the things that still work. And obviously last year they were working quite well for folks. We kind of went into some of the recon commands and stuff like that were, fairly basic, and along the way they were integrating some techniques. And when we were talking before the show, we were saying we get excited about some of these things that come out, but they still haven't made their way into, what a lot of the ransomware attackers are doing. They're still sticking with, tried and true things.
Which says what? Like, it works. Like, the old stuff still works. I saw one from the DFR report. They're Kerberoasting and, doing, it's like, what? Why? Came out in 2016. So would a prediction be we're going to see Print Nightmare in 4 years from now on a ransomware playbook?
I don't think so. I think we would have already seen that incorporated very quickly. Another good example of this one, I suppose, is going to be Eternal Blue, right? So Eternal Blue, within the first 2 months, we've got multiple worms that are using the exploit. It still goes over 445. So very similar in the grand scheme of things. Very similar in what the potential effect is going to be, system level remote code execution. But this one didn't make it end publicly available source code for the exploit. In the case of Print Nightmare, even before there is a vendor solution. So all of these things are very, very similar, but there's a big difference with what actually ended up happening. And so do we still see Eternal Blue today? Yeah, actually, I don't think I've gone a year since 2017 where I haven't seen it in at least one engagement. And that's actually used by attackers to this day because they've gotten used to it. I don't think Print Nightmare is going to do the same thing. I don't think Log4j is either.
Yeah. The other one we had was the Petit Totem attack, trying to, coerce authentication. I mean, that's been there was a exchange attack a while back that did that, and now this, and in the EFS space. I mean, this is still, relying on NTLM abuse for the most part, but I mean, I don't think we've seen the end of coercion attacks, and I think that one might stick around for a little bit. I know there was some patching, but
I think so too. Actually, I think that one's probably longer for the world than
Yeah, and I think also the ones that are related to AD attacks, we're getting a little better, but we're still seeing a lot, right? Like the old printer bug, like that still works in many places. For moving laterally through domains, I think we've got a way to go, and attackers are going to keep using what works. And we all got slightly depressed when we saw that Conti playbook. That's like, wow, stuff that we've been talking about for a while is still working and apparently making people millions and millions of dollars. Because I don't know how much you all charge for your red team gigs and pen tests, but using some of these are fairly low cost pen tests, and they're making millions, right? You mentioned Re-Evil with a big payout.
Yeah, Colonial Pipeline, same story. JBS as well. Lower payouts. And I say lower. Oh, man, they were only like 2 to 10 million.
Right.
Oh, man.
Well, and I got to a point where it was actually affecting people, right? Colonial,
Yes,
JBS,
absolutely.
right? Things that mattered to regular folks. And now, it has that visibility. Hopefully, it improves a bit with all of the eyes on it. But
I think that ransomware playbook, though, honestly, is a good thing. That the attackers are still in that space, because what it kind of indicates to us is you always have to ask yourself a question: hey, am I worried about these things in my network? And if the answer is no, but those are the things the attackers are focused on, that means they're probably not in your threat model. And I think most organizations that have actually put forward a concerted effort to do security right, like 99% of the attackers out there who are making these millions of dollars and who are showing up in the news on a day-to-day basis, are just not in your threat model. And I think that's 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, and then from that point, right, like all of those used some well-known C2 to communicate. And what did you see there? I know we did some talking about C2s back in the day. I think you still like them quite a bit.
Oh, I'm all about that C2. Cobalt Strike, though. Oh my gosh. Some days you almost even want to get on the bandwagon with the anti-offsec folks over it. Like, man, adversaries have over the years just gotten more and more into Cobalt Strike. They always used it, but last year specifically, we didn't see a lot of dispersion, I would say, in adversarial C2.
It's interesting because it's so telling about, you have the entire industry focused on a single tool and a single set of code. And I realize there's a lot of config changes and stuff like that you can make for signatures, but it's interesting to see that, the beast of InfoSec and all of the research power trying to go after a single tool, and it still, manages to still be, king in that space for now. I'm interested to see if there'll be a shift. I saw that some people were bringing back Empire and some other things. I don't know if maybe all of the giant focus on this has led to, like just going too far in one direction. Now, when you run an attack outside of Cobalt Strike, perhaps it's not as detected as well. I know in some EDR testing we were going back and forth with on Twitter, people were saying, the results they were getting if they were running it from Cobalt Strike were different than, a lesser known, still public framework, and they were thinking about switching back. So,
yeah, I'm actually doing EDR testing or testing on behalf of a vendor against their own EDR product right now. that's meant to find those kind of things, specifically with C2. And oh man, it was so obvious what they were trying to do, because Cobalt Strike default profiles and such, boom, flagging all over the place. Merlin, just run it, no problem. Sliver, no problem, no detections. Custom malware, who even knew that that was a thing? What? Who's looking for that? So even the EDR vendors are legitimately just not focused on anything else. And so if the adversaries know this, which you can't not, and they're still choosing to use Cobalt Strike, that I kind of think indicates a bigger problem.
Yeah, I think accessibility of EDR maybe the next couple of years will come down. I know CrowdStrike, for example, is now selling to small businesses, and you can get into like ATP now with their new licensing for less. I think that it's gonna have to. This is going to be a bridge to more security, but in the meantime, they're going to have to make it more accessible, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and some free EDRs I've heard being worked on. I actually asked just yesterday if folks are deploying both Sysmon and EDR or just EDR, and I thought I'd get very little of both, but actually like a fifth of the folks are doing both EDR and Sysmon, which is nice to see. We'll see if EDRs lower their entrance fee. But yeah, focusing on the tool is terrible. I've been pushing for that for a while, right? Focusing on TTPs, and then everyone kind of using MITRE ATT&CK and saying, "Oh, technique PowerShell, I got that, check." It's like, yeah, that's the technique. What about the actual procedure? And one of the things with C2, right, is that beaconing behavior that you change the profile, like Matt just mentioned. But didn't you say, Justin, the other day that you just tried like a standard long TCP connection, no detection? Like, feels like 2005 again.
We do bake-offs a lot of times for clients. They'll buy, they'll get demo environments of 2 or 3 EDRs, and they'll have us bake them off on top of whatever GPOs and controls they have. And it's always interesting to see, like, it's because some stuff we might not even try anymore, like on an actual engagement, some PowerShell Cradle stuff, we know that's usually highly detected. And every now and then we'll run across a scenario that fires shockingly on top of one of those products. And it's so basically you just work backwards and see what used to work and is no longer popular. This was a big thing in Metasploit where like the HTTPS payloads would get caught, but the reverse TCP would often go unnoticed because of the libraries it's loading and things like that. So there's still, it's always worth looking backwards to see what used to be effective and can get recycled.
Yeah, and that's pretty cyclical too. You had that with the old Metasploit encoders as well. You used to swap between the older ones and newer ones, and then it worked or it didn't work. Now that's not really such a thing anymore. But yeah, it's always looking back at older things. Sometimes because vendors really, like any kind of signature-based detection mechanism or any detection mechanism, whatever, can only have so many analytics or signatures that it's actually triggering through, because otherwise it's going to just bump the CPU to crazy town. Particularly if we're looking at malware that is interpreted as opposed to compiled. So say JScript ransomware or PowerShell technically, though AMC makes that a little harder. But anything interpreted becomes very, very difficult to create long-term lasting signatures against.
In the past year with the ransomware piece, kicked off a couple interesting changes this year was, XLM macros kind of popped up out of nowhere the past couple of years, very effective, which led to AMC and then eventually being blocked by default. And now, Microsoft revisited the past year or so of, macro payloads being huge, and then now having a requirement that unless they're signed or in a trusted location, they won't fire. So we're seeing some positive things from the past couple of years of ransomware. How those play out in reality, yet to be seen. But
yeah. And speaking of what's old is new, I think you brought up was CISA coming out with their known exploited vulnerability catalog, that things you should definitely patch. What'd you find there, Justin?
I got a kick out of the Flash one. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but we're just, it's interesting to see some of those old ones. You'd expect, hey, a couple of the staples, but the list is interesting, and the CVEs are several years old, and kind of back to the playbook part, focusing on where people are going, right? If you're a huge org and you got to prioritize, certain products that have a bunch of CVEs, maybe patching should be a priority, or at least going back and making sure that you have none on that list. But it is always interesting to see the ones that are being exploited that are, several years old. But
Yeah, and Matt, you said you have seen quite a bit of Eternal Blue. Have you seen some of these other older ones as well when you're doing your pen tests?
I haven't actually reviewed the CISA doc specifically, but yes, older. Well, so I think that we likely live in a bit of a microcosm, an InfoSec microcosm, which is to say, if I'm showing up for an incident response, the network I'm looking at is fundamentally just drastically different than the kind of network that I'm probably testing if I'm doing a pen test or red team, which means and I find this pretty fascinating. As a red teamer, I know that my tradecraft has changed absurdly over the past 3 years. Like it's night and day, completely different. Well, mostly different. But if we look at attackers, right, what they're doing is completely the same. There is very, very little. Individual things. Malware is constantly rotating a little bit. They're building their own tooling, but their tradecraft fundamentally hasn't really changed. It's get in with phishing or expose terminal services, look for bad passwords, escalate to admin, and then ransomware. That's still kind of the 1, 2, 3 question mark profit mentality for them. So when it comes to finding these older vulnerabilities, I think that it's accurate. I think that the document is completely right. I think that for most of the people who are probably tuning into this or listening to these kinds of things, we're just in a different world and we just haven't had the experience that is reality. It's like growing up in New York City and then going to Alabama for a weekend. It's just not the same place. But it's
Which I think is a perfect segue to what we all saw during the Super Bowl this weekend, which was a QR code going across the screen. If you scanned it, it was for, I think, $15 free on Coinbase, which, of course, resulted in lots of Twitter InfoSec hot takes. Justin, you want to weigh in on this one first? Because I like the transition of what we see and what the rest of the world sees might be different, but the same in some cases.
Yeah, so I mean, QR codes are extremely common now everywhere, and I know people in InfoSec were kind of upset about, is this good behavior? So then we started breaking down, grab your iPhone, look at the QR code, it gives you the URL, you click it yes or no, what's the context there? You contrast that with something like URL shorteners, right? I mean, similar concept. I think the big piece here is when you scan a QR code, you're expecting something. You go to a restaurant, you expect a menu. If you get a login page for PayPal or your bank, right? That's a weird workflow. You get an SMS that says it's your bank and you get a spoof login page. Like that workflow works. I think the hype is kind of overblown. Obviously, you can talk about 0 day, but again, how does that apply to a normal person? I don't know. It's just kind of your personal threat model and what's that mean for the average person?
Right. If it was a no day, it'd be a very expensive use of one.
I think the target also matters a bit too, because you're considering what's being used to scan this QR code. Well, it's a phone. So what's the access that is then provided, even in the situation that there is a 0 day? And it's definitely not something like corporate access to a machine that is connected to a Windows Active Directory domain where there's trust relationship that can be exploited on top of that. It's completely different, right? So even if millions of people were compromised simultaneously because the watering hole attack, if you will, has so much exposure, the fallout is still very different.
Yeah, we started talking about specific scenarios, right? Like I change a QR code in a physical location with a different sticker. So, you'd have to be there to swap it. There's cameras at that point. Could I just overlay a sticker with a different URL you were already going to? Like, there's a lot of, different pieces. There are a lot of moving parts to make it effective. Certainly, right, it's a concern. I think there was a giant underestimation of how common, QR codes are and, how average people are using them on a daily basis. Well, InfoSec people tend to be hyper aware of threats and kind of maybe overreact to some of them. There's a balance to be struck.
For certain.
Yeah,
I think we did a little bit. Oh, go for it.
No, you go.
I was going to say, I think we did a little bit of the same with Log4j, because the moment that came out, we were all screaming about there being 6 billion devices affected, which is theoretically true because that's how many places Java is. But there's a big difference between, oh, you installed Java versus you're actually vulnerable because you've got an application with that specific library that has some kind of feature that then exposes access to the logging system, which then enables JNDI exploitation. That's a big difference, right? That's not 6 billion devices.
Well, now we can look back, right? That was December 2021. I don't even know what year we're on right now. Year 3, right? And okay, right? We all, oh, this is bad. You gotta fix it. 2 months later, right about the same time as Eternal Blue, right? Eternal Blue, I think, was March 2017, and then 2 months later we saw WannaCry, and we didn't see that, right?
So we saw Night Sky for this one, but Night Sky is very easy to overlook because of how lame it is. So in the grand scheme of ransomware, right, we've been talking about these big numbers. Night Sky's number is 800K. They'll ransomware you for your Log4j vulnerability for 800K. I'm like, oh, that's so cute. Isn't that a problem when we look at 800K in ransomware extortion? We're like, oh, that's cute.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point, right? It wasn't like massively used. You look at, one of the things going back to ransomware and how the steps have changed, and where you mentioned they didn't. I think what we have seen though is the specialization of them. Like ReEvil in 2019 did the whole kill chain, and then they realized, oh crap, we have to hire people to do initial access, and then they bought like actual source code of various initial access methods. They revamped their actual ransomware. They started working with better affiliates, etc. So yeah, like the initial access is still there. You got your TrickBot, your Emotet, your I don't know, Wizard Spider or whatever they're called, and Bazaar loaders, etc. But they're not using Log4j, right? There was this one that used it. These folks are still just trying to get a macro through using like ISO files now or something like that. So
I mean, I think we always have to remember that the attacker's model is to go after the Windows Active Directory domain. And so if we see an attack that doesn't specifically affect that, QR code exploits, right, or Log4j, it's not that these are not important attacks. They could definitely be really bad. They could cause some significant damages. It's just the adversaries that we're probably most worried about don't have that in their model, and there's no incentive for them to learn these new techniques if they're already successful at 50 million a pop, right? So it's not that they're not bad. It's not that we shouldn't patch. But I think in InfoSec, we have a tendency to be really hyperbolic. We saw the same thing with Spectre and Meltdown, right? Back in the day. Well, I guess back in the day. What is that, 2016?
Yeah. Back in the day for all intended purposes.
That's eons and eons ago in InfoSec time. But yeah, those are really, really cool exploits. Like they're really, really hot. Like, oh man, I'm into
like
it.
A new class of vulnerability that we hadn't seen before. So
absolutely. And then the potential damages, right? Virtual machine escape, maybe down to bare metal, do the attack against something like AWS. Oh, that's super cool. But these are like theories, and the theory might be cool, but when we look at the facts on the ground, that might not match. And I think in InfoSec, that's one of our biggest challenges.
Yeah, and that's in line with the whole QR code thing, right? Or at least
and I don't know if the groups going after initial access get enough credit on their ability to pivot, right? You have people focusing on like TrickBot and all those things, and they are constantly shifting directions, like you mentioned the ISO thing, right? So now we're going to look at different mark of the web bypasses. It'll be really interesting to see what happens probably later this year by the time those macro controls get rolled out, to see if they go to a different file type, if it's going to be like JS droppers, or they package, they steal code signing certs. That obviously the innovation is painful for defenders, but it's interesting to see where they're going to go. They're losing their most common access method, so there could be pushing into like HTA or some other format.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how well that works, because what would interest me the most is if they don't change. Because if they don't change, that means something about the control, right? But my money would be on JS droppers personally.
Wow. And now back to PowerShell.
Got one more year, and then red teams will pick year and a half. Red teams will be back on PowerShell. And that was a good point too from before, where it's red teams and people on Twitter who do offense right now are different, and they're more edge case than what's happening in the mainstream, because a lot of the the ransomware groups are going after people who don't have EDR products or don't have some level of visibility. So it's interesting when people are like, why are you guys pushing this research in this area? And you may need it to attack mature clients, but where the majority of risk is right now is this middle of the road Conti playbook style attack.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Matt. I know you're working on you're a SANS instructor. You have one SANS class already. You're working on a second one. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh,
what
absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, the new class we're working on is SANS Security 665, which is Advanced Red Team Tactics. Essentially, this is, well, I'll be honest, I don't necessarily think this is a course that's going to sell all that much because it's not easy, but it's a passion project for me. It's all about the things that I want to do, and designing the class and making it's actually been particularly fun in general because it lets me, in fact, it forces me to keep doing research on whatever we're doing in red team and offense at the moment. For example, one thing that we did see a lot of last year was just an absolutely absurd number of really, really small one-off red team projects. Like if you just look at all the GitHub posts on InfoSec Twitter over the past year, it's all little tool here, little tool there, but they all have some pretty nice implications, like the tool releases for Petit Ponum, for example. But there are many more of these too. I find that fascinating. I love to do that research and learn new ways to do things, and that's the purpose of the class. I'm also a little frightened by it though, now that I've been focusing on all of these little pieces so much. I think we might be building ourselves a situation in which no red teamer can possibly know the right choices most of the time. Not plenty of the time, but actually most of the time, because there's so many options out there these days.
That is actually very interesting, and something I've been looking at. We haven't talked about this quite at all, is attack trees, like actual making decisions. Because, I work at a company where we like automating a lot of things, and how you from a red team perspective think is not really mapped out very well, right? Like the Conti playbook, if a shop has something like that internally, it's like, cool, good documentation, but you still need that person that think of what to use and when. And that I don't think we talk about. I don't think we document well. We don't go in the simple example, right? Just for sake of example, is like you land on a system, you find out what privilege you have, then you make a decision, right? Something as simple as that. Like, yeah, we know what to do because we've been doing it, but that's an art, right? Can we make it a science? And looking into some of that stuff is something I've been a little bit interested in lately to see. I do like that you're building your class out as a way to learn how to, create these. Whereas more like a 500 level class in SANS, right? You have different levels, just like college. Right? A 500 level class, it's more of like, this is a technique, this is a tool to do it, this is how you do it. Whereas 600 level, we're talking more advanced of actually learning how to build it. Seeing a little bit of that too, like implement development courses. I think Joff has one over with Black Hills or Anti-Siphon, and Rasta Mouse, I think, has one as well, which is pretty cool. But again, that's very limited people, like you said. It's not going to be everyone doing that. But definitely, I think that'll be interesting to see where that goes, where we go, and then where attackers go, because not it doesn't always match, right?
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a team solve the mind map. There's some tools to do that. I think it's ultimately a combination of things. Like personally, what I've been trying to solve it is leveraging the whole rest of the team and meeting on a regular basis, and then kind of using client goals to back into the routes you take. I think people are starting to get, more in tune with, we locked down AD really well. What other paths can you give us to the cloud, development data, things like that? And if you start working backwards, it sometimes help you, push you in the right direction. But again, there's building a repeatable system for your team, and mapping that is the holy grail of trying to do this.
It is, yeah. And I think that's one of the larger challenges in red team as well, for almost a divergent reason. Because whenever you're doing some kind of InfoSec service, at the end, you want to make sure that you can guarantee that you're going to be providing some kind of value to the client. And I think you can totally do that with red team every time. I think you can. But at the same time, I think red team is so based around these light bulb moments that it can be very difficult to iteratively always provide the same kind of value. I think the standard deviation is just so big because you don't know. And sometimes you might get lucky and go, oh, yeah, you know what? I should try that. And it does work. But then other times that light bulb moment doesn't necessarily happen. So plotting a path to make those as commonly accessible as possible, I think that, like you said, it's holy grail for sure.
Yeah, and it's opportunistic as well, right? Like we get on a system, we see where we are, we do discovery and whatnot, and then we see what's possible, right? Maybe DLL search order hijacking or COM hijacking, or I don't know, right? It's an opportunity that arises, and we have to know to find it and then leverage it.
There's even some luck involved sometimes, like opportunism, as you said. I was doing a test recently for an organization where we got domain admin because they had a dev device that is off every single moment of every day, except for when their dev part of the organization is doing a sprint and they're doing backwards compatibility testing. So this is a Server 2003 device, and the only reason they have it is for backwards compatibility testing. But it was connected to Active Directory. Domain admin was logged into it for some reason. So Mimikat's very easy. But it also wasn't patched. And the reason it wasn't patched is because it's a dev device and it was virtual. So they were snapshotting it. And so what they would do is they would turn it on 1 day out of 3 months, and they would revert it snapshots. They have a clean state. Oh, all the patches are gone. Boom. That was my Eternal Blue story from last year, actually, or at least one of them. Yeah, it was Eternal Blue, easy in. And they didn't even realize that this was possibly going to be in their threat model. Very, very simple, but at the same time, we had like 1 day out of every 90 where there was even a chance of finding that.
Nice.
Sometimes just luck. We've dealt with this with clients where you do like reoccurring gigs every quarter. I think the way we were able to find value is, we would try something. They want us to come up with something off the wall and not try the same tried and true. And if it ultimately fails on our side, they can use it as a learning opportunity to hunt on that data. We did some stuff with Microsoft has encrypted email using like AIP. You can send, a document and an email encrypted. Only the user can unlock it. So we did some stuff like that. The payload failed, but when they went to go do IR on it, they realized that they couldn't access the email without the user's credentials, which had them make a whole new playbook. So there's definitely opportunities that you can turn into a hunt or new detections and things like that. And I think people get really hung up on just winning, as opposed to there's definitely lessons learned along the way, and you can build on those, on both sides.
Yeah, on our side, we do training objectives before we start the red team. And so we'll guaranteed fulfill any training objectives that we've assigned for the blue team. As in, like, blue team wants to test out their new EDR or whatever it is. So we'll figure out some ways to give them that kind of information happening on their system so they can say, okay, this thing is working, or oops, we need to tune it a little bit more. I think that's one way you can get repeatable value off red team every time, for sure.
Sweet. Well, want to thank you for your time today, Matt. Always insightful and always good catching up. I don't even know the last time we talked. So thanks for coming on. And thank you, Justin, as well, as usual. Always great conversation. And to listeners out there, we'll see you next Thursday or the third Thursday of the month, at 3 p.m. And let us know if you have ideas for topics to discuss. Obviously, we can pull quite a bit and just ramble on for hours, but and of course guests. But once again, thank you very much, Matt, and hope everyone has a great day.
My pleasure, everyone. Good to see you. Good to hang. Nice vibing.
Thanks for coming.